All right, y'all. Chapter 3. Bless me, ULTIMA. I don't know if it's because of the way I'm feeling right now or whatever. But this book is like the beginning of it, and I'm not as kind of bored right now, but I'm blessed still. So I'm kind of tired of reading too a little bit. I think I read a lot today, and maybe I should take one more chapter, and I think we'll call it a night. The day dawned, and already the time of youth was fleeing the house which the three giants of my dreams had built on the hill of juniper tree and yucca and mesquite bush. I felt the sun of the east rise, and I heard its light crackle and groan and mix into the songs of mockingbirds on the hill. Opened my eyes, and the rays of light that dazzled through the dusty windows of my room washed my face clean. The sun was good. The men of Yana were men of sun. The men of the farms along the river were men of the moon, but we were all children of the white sun. There was a bitter taste in my mouth. I remembered the remedy ULTIMA had given me after my frightful flight from the river. I looked at my arms and I felt my face. I had received cuts from the branches before, and I knew that the next day the cuts were red with dry blood and that the welts were sore. But last night's cuts were only thin pink lines on my flesh, and there was no pain. There was a strange power in ULTIMA's medicine. Where was Lupita's soul? He had killed the sheriff, and so he had died with the mortal sin on his soul. He would go to hell, or would God forgive him and grant him purgatory, the lonely, hopeless resting place of those who neither saved nor damned? But God didn't forgive anyone. Perhaps, like the dream said, the waters of the river had washed his soul away, and perhaps as the river seeped into the earth, Lupito's soul would water the orchards of my uncles, and ripe red apples would. Or perhaps he would be doomed to wander the river bottom forever, a bloody mate to La Llorona. And now when I walked along the river, I would always have to turn and glance over my shoulder to catch a glimpse of a shadow, Lupito's soul, or La Llorona, or the presence of the river. I lay back and watched the silent beams of the light radiate in the colorful dust motes I had stirred up. I loved to watch the sunbeams of each new morning enter the room. They made me feel fresh and clean and new. Each morning I seemed to awaken with new experiences and dreams strangely mixed into me. Today was all the vivid images of what had happened at the bridge last night. I thought of Chavez, angered by the death of his brother, seeking the blood of revenge. I thought of Narciso standing alone against the dark figures on the bridge. I thought of my father, wondering if he had fired down on Lupito. Now the men on the bridge walked the earth with the terrible burden of dark mortal sin on their souls, and hell was the only reward. I heard my mother's footsteps in the kitchen. I heard the stove clang, and I knew she was kindling last night's ashes. Gabrielle, she called. She always called my father first. Get up, it is Sunday, then she muttered, and oh, such evil things that walked the earth last night. On Sunday morning, I always stayed in bed and listened to their argument. They always quarreled on Sunday morning. There were two reasons for this. The first was that my father worked only half a day on Saturdays at the highway, and so in the afternoon he drank with his friends at the Longhorn Saloon in town. If he drank too much, he came home a bitter man. Then he was at war with everyone. He cursed the weak-willed men of the town who did not understand the freedom a man of Viana must have. And he cursed the war for taking his sons away. And if there was very much anger in him, he cursed my mother because she was the daughter of farmers, and it was she who kept him shackled to one piece of land. Then there was a thing about religion. My father was not a strong believer in religion. When he was drunk, he called priests women and made fun of the long skirts they wore. I heard a story told in whispers, not meant for my ears, that once, long ago, my father had taken a priest from the church and beaten him on the street for preaching against something my grandfather Modest had done. So it was not a good feeling my father had for priests. My mother said the Modest clan was full of free thinkers, which was a blasphemy to her, but my father only laughed. Then there was the strange whispered riddle of the first priest who went to Aporto. The colony had first settled there under a land grant from the Mexican government. The man who led the colonization was a priest, and he was a Luna. That is why my mother dreamed of me becoming a priest, because there had not been a Luna priest in the family for many years. My mother was a devout Catholic, and so she saw the salvation of the soul rooted in the Holy Mother Church, and she said the world would be saved if the people turned to the earth. A community of farmers ruled over by a priest, she firmly believed, was a true way of life. Why two people as opposite as my father and my mother had married, I do not know. The blood in their ways had kept them at odds, and yet for all this we were happy. Deborah, she called, get up, get Teresa clean and dressed. Hey, what a night it has been, I heard her murmur prayers. I heard the yells, I heard my father groan as he walked into the kitchen. The sun coming over the hill, the sons of my father and mother in the kitchen. ULTIMA shuffle in the room as she burned incense for the new day. My sisters rushing past my door. All this is as what had always been, and it was good. Antonia, my mother called just when I knew she would, and I jumped out of bed. But today I was awakening with the new knowledge. There will be no breakfast this morning, my mother said as we gathered around. And today we will all go to communion. Today we'll all go to communion. Men walk the world as animals, and we must pray that they see God's light. And to my sisters, she said, today you will offer up half of your communion for your brothers, that God bring them home safely, and half for what happened last night. What happened last night, Deborah asked. She was like that. I shivered and wondered if she had heard me last night, and she would tell on me. Never mind, my mother said clearly. Just pray for the dearly departed souls. Deborah agreed, but I knew that at church she would inquire and find out about the killing of the sheriff and Upito. It was strange that she should have to ask others when I, who had been there, seen everything, stood next to her. Even now I could hardly believe that I had been there. Had it been a dream, or had it been a dream within a dream, the kind that I often had, and which seemed so real? I felt a soft hand on my head and turned and saw Ultima. She looked down at me, and that clear, bright power in her eyes held me spellbound. How do you feel this morning, my Antonio? She asked, and all I could do was nod my head. Buenos dias, le de Dios grande. My mother greeted her. So did my father, who was drinking coffee at the big chair. At the big chair he kept by the stove. Antonio, mind your manners, my mother urged me. I had not greeted Ultima properly. Ay, Marita Luna, Ultima interrupted. You leave Antonio alone, please. Last night was hard for many men, she said mysteriously, and went to the stove where my father poured her some coffee. My father and Ultima were the only people I ever knew that did not mind breaking their fast before communion. The man, yes, my mother acknowledged. But my Tony is only a boy, a baby yet. She placed her hands on my shoulders and held me. Ah, but boys grow to be men, Ultima said as she sipped the black, scalding coffee. Aye, how true, my mother said, and clutched me tightly. And what a sin is it for a boy to grow into a man? It was a sin to grow up and be a man. And what a sin it is for a boy to grow into a man. It was a sin to grow up and be a man. It is no sin, my father spoke up, only a fact of life. Aye, but life destroys the pureness of God gives. Aye, but life destroys the pureness God gives. It does not destroy my father, who's becoming irritated at having to go to church and listen to a sermon too. It builds up. Everything he sees and does makes him a man. I saw Lupito murdered. I saw the men. I, my mother cried. If only he could become a priest, that would save him. He would be always with God. Oh, Gabriel, she beamed with joy. Just think the honor it would bring our family to have a priest. Perhaps today we should talk to Father Burns about it. Be sensible, my father stood up. The boy hasn't even been through his catechism. It is not the priest who will decide when the time comes, but Tony himself. He stalked past me. The smell of gunpowder was on his clothes. They say the devil smells of sulfur. It is true, Ultima added. My mother looked at them and then at me. Her eyes were sad. Go feed the animals, my Tonito. She pushed me away. It is almost time for mass. I ran out and felt the first cool touch of early autumn in the air. Soon it would be time to go to my uncle's farms for the harvest. Soon it would be time to go to school. I looked across the river. The town seemed still asleep. A thin mist rose from the river. It blurred the trees and buildings of town. It hid the church tower and the schoolhouse top. Ya las campanas de la iglesia están doblando. I wanted not to think anymore of what I had seen last night. I threw fresh alfalfa into the rabbit's pen and changed their water. I opened the door and the cow bounded out. Hungry for fresh grass, today she will not be milked. Today she will not be milked until the evening, and she will be very heavy. I saw her run towards the highway, and I was glad that she did not wander towards the river where the grass was stained. Por la sangre de Lupito, todos debemos le rogar que Dios la saque de peña y la lleve a descansar. I was afraid to think anymore. I saw the glistening of the railroad tracks, and my eyes fastened on them. If I follow the tracks, I'll arrive in Las Pasturas, the land of my birth. Someday I would return and see the little village where the train stopped for water, where the grass was as high as green as the waves of the ocean, where the men rode horses and then laughed and cried at births, weddings, dances, and wakes. Antonio, I thought it was the voice of my dreams and jumped, but it was my mother calling. Everyone was ready for mass. My mother and Ultima dressed in black because so many women at the town had dressed in black, or had lost sons or husbands in the war, and they were in mourning. Those years it seemed that the whole town was in mourning, and it was very sad on Sundays to see the rows of black-dressed women walking in procession to church. Aye, what a night, my father groaned. Today, 2 more families will be in mourning in the town of Guadalupe, and indirectly the far-off war of the Japanese and the Germans had come to claim 2 victims in New Mexico. Ven acá, Antonio, my mother scolded. She wet my dark hair and brushed it down. In spite of her dark clothing, she smelled sweet, and it made me feel better to be near her. I wish that I could always be near her, but that was impossible. The war had taken my brothers away, and so the school would take me away. Ready, Mama, Deborah called. She said that in school the teachers let them speak only in English. I wondered how I would be able to speak to the teachers. Gabriel, my mother called. CC, my father groaned. I wondered how heavy last night's sin lay on his soul. My mother, okay, CC, my father groaned. And then the little kid is thinking, so if he's barely starting school, he's 4 years old, and he's seen a murder like that? Or just my opinion, but my mother took one last, meaning that's pretty horrible unless they start school kind of late, but I'm not sure. My mother took one last cursory glance at her brood, then led the way up the goat path. We called the path from our home to the bridge the goat path because when we ran to meet our father after his day's work, he said we looked like goats, cabroncitos, or cabritos. We must have made a strange procession. My mother leading the group with her swift, proud walk, Deborah and Teresa skipping around her, my father muttering and dragging behind, and finally Ultima and myself. As una mujer que no ha pecado, some would whisper of Ultima. La curandera, though, they would exchange nervous glances. Hechicera, bruja, I heard once. Why are you so thoughtful, Antonio, Ultima asked. Usually I was picking up stones to have ready for stray rabbits that crossed our path, but today my thoughts kept my soul in a shroud. I was thinking of Lupito, I said. My father was on the bridge, I added. Why are you so thoughtful, Ultima asked. Usually I was picking up stones to have ready for stray rabbits that crossed our path, but today my thoughts kept my soul in a shroud. I was thinking of Lupito, I said. My father was on the bridge, I added. That is so, she said simply. But Ultima, how can he go to communion? How can he take God in his mouth and swallow him? Will God forgive his sin and be with him? For a long time, Ultima did not answer. A man of the llano, she said, will not take the life of a llanero unless there was just cause, and I do not think your father fired at Lupito last night. And more important, mi hijo, you must never judge who God forgives and who he doesn't. We walked together and I thought about what she said. I knew she was right. Ultima, I asked, what was it you gave me to make me sleep last night, and did you carry me to my room? She laughed. I am beginning to understand why your mother calls you the Inquisitor, she said. But I want to know. There are so many things I want to know, I insisted. A curandera cannot give away her secret, she said, but if a person really wants to know, then he will listen and see and be patient. Knowledge comes slowly. I walked along thinking about what she had said. When we came to the bridge, my mother hurried the girls across, but my father paused to look over the railing. I looked too. What happened down there was like a dream, so far away. The brown waters of the river of the Carp wound their way southward to the orchards of my uncles. We crossed the bridge and turned right. The dirt road followed the high cliff of the river on this side. It wound into the cluster of houses around the church and kept going, following the river to El Puerto. To our left began the houses and buildings of the town. All seemed to turn towards the main street of town except one. This house, a large, rambling, gray stucco with a picket fence surrounding the weedy grounds, stood away from the street, perched on a ledge that dropped 50 feet down into the river below. A long time ago, the house had belonged to a very respectable family, but they had moved into town after the waters of the river began to cut into the cliff below them. Now the house belonged to a woman named Rosie. I knew that Rosie was evil. Not evil like a witch, but evil in other ways. Once the priest had preached in Spanish against the women who lived in Rosie's house, and so I knew that their place was bad. Also, my mother knew that place was bad. Also, my mother admonished us to bow our heads when we passed in front of the house. The bell of the church began to ring. Una mujer con un diente que llama a toda la gente. The bell called the people to 6 o'clock mass. But no, today was not just telling us that in 5 minutes mass would begin. Today was crying the knell of Lupito. Hey, I heard my mother crying, saw her cross her forehead. La campana de la iglesia está doblando. The church bell tolled and drew to it the windows in black. The lonely, faithful women who came to pray for the men. Arimense vivos y difuntos, aquí estamos todos juntos. The church rose up from the dust of the road. The church rose up from the dust of the road. Huge brown granite blocks rose skyward to the hold of the bell tower. The church rose up from the dust of the road. Here's something. The church rose up. The church rose up from the dust of the road. Huge brown granite blocks something. I don't know what it is. Alright, so the church rose up from the dust of the road. Huge brown granite blocks rose skyward to hold the bell tower and cross of Christ. It was the biggest building I had ever seen in all my life, and all the people gathered at its doors like ants, asking questions and passing on rumors about what happened last night. My father went to talk to the men, but my mother and Ultima stood apart with the women with whom they exchanged formal greetings. I went around the side of the church where I knew the boys from town hung around until Mass began. Most of the kids were older than I. They were in the 2nd or 3rd grade at school. I knew most of them by name, not because I walked with them, not because I talked to them, but because after many Sundays of observing them, I had learned who they were and a little bit about their characteristics. I knew that when I went to school in the fall, I would get to know them well. I was only sad because they would be a year ahead of me, and I already felt close to them. My old man saw Lupito do it. Ernie pointed his thumb in Abel's face. I knew Ernie liked to brag. Bullshit, Horse cried out. They called him Horse because his face looked like the face of a horse, and he was always stomping at the ground. Chingada, da bastard, Nebed, have a chance. Boog. Bones exploded like a pistol. He grabbed the top of his head and toppled on the dust of the street. His eyes rolled wildly. Bones was even crazier than Horse. I went to the river this morning, Samuel said softly. There was blood on the sand. No one heard him. I knew he lived across the river like I did, but he lived upriver where there were a few houses just past the railroad bridge. I'll race you, the vitamin kid. I'll race you, the vitamin kid pawed nervously at the ground. I'll race you, the vitamin kid pawed nervously at the ground. I never knew his real name. Everyone just called him the vitamin kid, even the teachers at school. He could run, oh how he could run, not even Bones in high school. Oh, not even Bones in high gear or Horse at full gallop could outrun the vitamin kid. He was like the wind. Bullshit, Horse cleared his throat and let fly a frog. And Florence cleared his throat and spit a nice wad that beat Horse's by 5 feet at least. Hey, he beat you, damn, he beat you, Abel laughed. Abel was very small, even smaller than I, and he should never have teased Horse. If there was one thing Horse loved to do, that was to wrestle. His long arms reached out, caught Abel before he could move away, and flipped him easily into the air. Abel landed hard on the ground. Cabrón, he whimpered. Did he beat me? Horse asked as he stood over Abel. No, Abel cried. He got up slowly, faking a broken leg. Then when he was out of the horse's reach, he called. He beat you, fucker. He beat you. Yeah. My old man was right in the cafe when it happened, Ernie continued. Ernie always wanted to be the center of interest. He said Lupito just walked in real slow, walked up right behind the sheriff, who was biting into a piece of cherry pie, put the pistol to the back of the sheriff's head. Bullshit, Horse neighed loudly. Hey, Florence, top this one. Again, he cleared his throat and spit. Nah, Florence grinned. He was tall and thin with curly blonde hair that fell to his shoulders. I had never seen anyone like him, so white and speaking Spanish. He reminded me of one of the golden angel heads with wings that hovered at the feet of the Virgin in her pictures. Cherry pie, and there were brains and blood all over the damn place, on the table, on the floor, even on the ceiling. His eyes were open as he fell, and before he hit the floor, Lupito was out the door. Bullshit, damn, chingada. He'll go to hell, Lloyd said in his girl's voice. It's the law that he go to hell for what he did. Everybody's from Los Hatos goes to hell, Florence laughed. Los Hatos was what they called the neighborhood across the tracks, and Horse and Bones and Abel and Florence were from there. You're going to hell, Florence, because you don't believe in God, Horse shouted. Los Vados des Los Hatos are tough, Bones gurgled. He wiped his thumbs on his nose, and green snot dangled there. Damn, chingada. Come on, Florence, let's wrestle, Horse said. He was still angry about the spitting contest. You can't wrestle before Mass, it's a sin, Lloyd cut in. Bullshit, Horse said, and he turned to pounce on Lloyd, but as he did, he saw me for the first time. He looked up for a long time, and he called me, hey, kid, come here. They watched me with interest as I walked towards the horse. I did not want to wrestle with Horse. He was tougher and bigger than I, but my father had often said that a man of Llano does not run from a fight. Who's that? Don't know, chingada. The horse reached for my neck, but I knew about this favorite trick and ducked. I went low and came up yanking at his left leg. With a hard pull, I flipped the horse on his back. Hijola, a la veca. Did you see that? The kid threw the horse. Everyone laughed at Horse in the dust. He got up slowly, his wild eyes never leaving me. He wiped the seat of his pants and came towards me. I braced myself and stood my ground. I knew I was in for a whipping. The horse came up to me very slowly until his face was close to mine. His dark, wild eyes held me hypnotically, and I could hear the deep sounds a horse makes inside his chest when he is ready to buck. Saliva curled around the edges of his mouth, and spittle threads hung down and glistened like spider threads in the sun. He chomped his teeth, and I could smell his bad breath. Like a horse. thought the horse was going to rear up and paw and stomp me into the ground, and I guess the other kids did too because they were very quiet. But instead of attacking me, the horse let out a wild, shocking cry that sent me reeling backward. Wah! He brayed. The little runt actually threw me. He threw me, he laughed. What's your name, kid? The other kids breathed easier. The horse was not going to commit murder. Anthony Mares, I replied. Antonio Juan Mares y Luna added disrespect to my mother. Damn, chingada. Hey, you, Andrew's brother, horse asked. I nodded yes. I'll put her there. I shook my head no. I knew that horse couldn't resist throwing anyone who held out his hand. It was just his nature. Smart kid, Bones laughed. Shut up, horse glared at him. Okay, kid, I mean Anthony, you're a smart kid. The last guy that threw me was a big fifth grader, you hear? I didn't mean to, I said. Everyone laughed. I know you didn't, horse smiled, and you're too small to fight. That's why I'm going to let you get away with it, but don't think you can do it again, understand? The message was as much for me as for the rest of the gang, because we all nodded. They all gathered around me and asked me where I lived and about school. They were good friends, even though they sometimes said bad words, and that dad became a part of their gang. And Abel, who had been pissing against the church wall, called out that mass was starting, and we all rushed to get the premium pews at the very back of the church. This is a good book. Okay, this next chapter is not that long. It's only up to 46. But I still think I'm going to do it in a separate, so thanks for tuning in. This is chapter 3.